Never in human history has the concept of enlightenment been mentioned as much as it is today on social media platforms. Forums, spiritual courses, or inspirational videos. People are constantly talking about awakening, raising the vibrational frequency, opening the chakras, living with a higher self, or returning to the inner light. There are people who, after just a few unusual experiences, have declared themselves awakened. There are people who stand up to teach about the path to enlightenment as if they have reached the other shore. And there is no shortage of communities and live streams built around the belief that they have escaped the delusion of the world. Awakening seems to be becoming a spiritual cultural trend, where more and more people want to be recognized as having seen the truth, having transcended the ego, having integrated into the universe. They no longer talk like normal people, no longer living like ordinary people, but wearing a calm, somewhat mystical, awakened demeanor. Every action, word, and even a look in the eyes is expressed as a testament to the presence of transcendence or dwelling in mindfulness. We are living in an era where information and experience is exchanged at a very fast speed, but it is also an era where illusion can be disguised as knowledge, as spirituality, as awakening, and become the most subtle deception when a person has never truly overcome the ego, but believes that he has escaped from it. Then that belief will become the most solid barrier preventing them and everyone from reaching the truth. And that is why, more than ever, we need to clearly distinguish between awakening and enlightenment. Not to judge who is right or wrong, but to reflect on our own journey to see whether we are truly awakening or just living in a new dream that is more subtle, sweeter, but also further from the truth. And from there, a type of syndrome was born that Triet Tam called awakened person syndrome. Awakened person syndrome is not a pathological phenomenon, but a very sophisticated type of false perception when an individual believes that he has achieved a state of deep awakening, while in fact he has only been exposed to a few spiritual phenomena or inner experiences whole. Their ego does not disappear, it just changes its shell, putting on a new coat, more splendid, more abstract, and difficult to identify in this era when spiritual knowledge, energy, meditation, and the concepts of awakening, liberation, living with the true self are widely shared on the internet. Then the opportunity for people to touch another state of awareness also becomes easier. But that ease comes with a great risk. The ego grasps those concepts, memorizes them, and begins to build a new image for itself. The image of the initially awakened person, a person who can truly experience a mental shock, a new view of the nature of life, and experience beyond the edge of reason. But instead of continuing to observe, dig deep, and let go, they rush to conclusions. I have seen the truth. From there, a new mental mechanism is formed, spiritual self. It is not as noisy as the normal self, does not require success, money, or power. It just needs to maintain an image that it is different, higher, or escaped. And there, the person with the syndrome does not know that they have just fallen into the deepest trap of the ego. The trap is wrapped in light and admiration. No one has to fool them anymore because they have been manipulated by their own ego in a convincing way. They do not intentionally lie. They truly feel that they have opened their eyes, but that feeling, if not continued to be observed carefully, will become the root of a subtle ego layer, and from that root layer they begin to build a lifestyle. Language, gestures, social interactions all revolve around the role of awakened person. Unfortunately, society now not only does not warn them about it, but also praises, glorifies, and pushes them to live deeper in that role they are invited to share. Called inspirational people are seen as symbols of transformation. And little by little they become prisoners in the image they create. They are not allowed to be tired. They are not allowed to be sad. They are not allowed to make mistakes because that will lose the image of the awakened person worse. This syndrome also creates an illusion collective where many people live in the illusion that they have overcome suffering when in reality they are just avoiding suffering with beautiful spiritual concepts. They are not really transforming their inner self, but just replacing the raw suffering with a mask that is softer, more subtle, more profound, but still a denial of reality. The essence of awakened person syndrome lies in the fact that it prevents people from moving forward. It makes people stop halfway believing that they have reached the destination when the real path has not even begun. It makes people reject every advice, every response, every sign of incompleteness because they have believed too much in the imaginary light that they are standing in. And only when they dare to take off that cloak of awareness, dare to admit that they do not know anything, have not seen anything, have not let go of anything, then the real journey can begin. But to do that, they must be willing to go through a dark area where there is no more role, no more polished language, no more admiring eyes, only themselves facing the naked truth of themselves. The sophistication of this state lies in the fact that no one can easily refute them, because every objection will be labeled as coming from the unawakened ego or limited mind. From there, they create a closed circle where they are always right, and those who have not seen it are of course wrong or not profound enough. They often talk about letting go, but cling tightly to the image of the one who has let go. They preach about the dissolution of the ego while their own ego is operating strongly behind those words, an ego that is no longer crude but refined, trained to the point of being confident that I no longer exist. That statement, though seemingly pure, is evidence that there is still someone who wants to have the last word. People who mistakenly claim to be enlightened often confuse theoretical knowledge with actual realization. They can quote Zen books, Buddhist terminology describing a sublime state of mind with surprising accuracy. But when observed closely, there is something that does not match: a sense of awkwardness or a slight lack of honesty in their eyes, voice, or the way they react when others disagree. Why? Because knowledge cannot replace life experience, and real experience does not need to prove anything. In addition, they often appear indifferent to everything, but that indifference does not come from a strong inner self, but from an effort to maintain an image. They avoid facing real emotions, especially emotions that are not suitable for enlightened people, such as anger, sadness, fear. They no longer allow themselves to be normal people, but strain themselves to maintain a peaceful appearance at all times. That is what creates an internal separation. On the one hand, the ideal ego is acting. On the other hand, the dark parts have never been touched. They also often lose the ability to truly listen to others, not because they intentionally interrupt or reject, but because they only listen to confirm their own perceptions, not to be moved. In each conversation, they are in the position of a guide, a helper, a guide, and that seems very good, very spiritual, but underneath it is a desire to be recognized. Something that truly enlightened people no longer care about. The last and most serious sign is the cessation of self-doubt. The enlightened person has believed that he has nothing more to learn, has reached the end, has seen clearly the nature of all things. He lives in a zone of perception that seems stable but is actually frozen. No longer flexible, no longer soft, no longer able to melt into the new, and thus not only does he not evolve, but is gradually falling into a special kind of ignorance. Ignorance glazed with false awareness, while the person who truly sees something, even if it is small, becomes more humble, quieter, and no longer rushes to conclusions. He no longer wants to affirm who he is. and no longer expects others to understand him correctly. He knows clearly. The more he sees, the more silent, the deeper he goes, the more he disappears. And if there is anyone who is still affirming that he has disappeared, then it is very possible that he is still present in a more skillful form. It is just that on this journey, the deeper one goes on the spiritual path, the easier it is to get lost, not because of lack of understanding, but because the sophistication of the ego has changed into a more unrecognizable form. If in the material world the ego is clearly revealed through desire, anger, and jealousy, in the spiritual world it disguises itself with noble ideas, holy concepts, and metaphysical experiences. This is what makes people on the spiritual path more likely to get stuck than ordinary people, because they do not know that they are being led by an ego with a face that transcends the desire for enlightenment. If not looked at directly, it is just a form of desire. Become special. Many people come to the spiritual path not because they are fed up with the ego, but because they want to upgrade the ego to a higher form. They do not want to let go of the ego, but want the ego to become great, deep, mysterious, admired by others, not because of wealth, but because of awakening. This is a very sweet trap. It is not rough like ordinary ambition, but is covered by the name of liberation, transformation, serving humanity. The deeper one goes into practice, the more inner experiences the states of stillness dissolve connection. Even the feeling of no longer me can appear, and if there is not careful observation, they will hastily affirm that I have arrived. But the truth is that all experiences are still under the control of the mind, and anything that can still be described still leaves an echo, still creates a feeling I have seen, is still not the ultimate truth. The biggest trap is not ignorance, but the illusion that one has left ignorance. The ordinary person still knows that he does not understand, but the person who thinks he is enlightened no longer doubts themselves. They stop at a fixed perception, living in an old image that they call light, and continue to play the role of a guide with the belief that they have completed. This is not a criticism, but a painful truth that very few people dare to look at, because admitting that they have lost their way means giving up the role that has been invested in so much effort, so much praise, and even a career. But if you do not dare to let go, then that very spiritual path will become a maze where people go forever without ever seeing the exit, because the person who goes has lost the ability to realize that he is still going. The most sophisticated trap is not in the world of delusion, but lies at the threshold of the thought that he has escaped. It does not need to hold you back with a chain, but with a very gentle sentence: you have arrived. And if you believe in that, then the journey stops right where it needs to start, only when you dare to step out of all definitions of who you are on this journey. When you no longer try to be anyone, even an enlightened person, then the door of truth opens. No, the light is given behind, no title is given, only absolute emptiness, where every image of self has been burned to ashes in the space of today's spiritual conversations. The two concepts of awakening and enlightenment are often used interchangeably, as if they both refer to the same thing, the realization of the truth. But in fact, these are two completely different states, not only in depth, but also in the nature of the process and consequences. If one does not distinguish this, one can easily fall into the illusion that one has arrived, while in fact one has only stepped through the first gate. So what is awakening? Awakening is the moment when we suddenly see a truth that our mind has never touched before. It can be a change in the way we see the world, a spiritual shock, a reversal of our value system. Some people awaken after a loss. Some people awaken in the middle of a moment of contemplation. Some people realize something very profound just because of a saying. a book a look. However, it is important to emphasize that awakening is not the end of ignorance, but just the moment when we realize that we have been living in ignorance. It is like waking up from a dream. You open your eyes and realize that everything you have been pursuing for so long is just an illusion. But even though you have opened your eyes, you are still lying in bed. You have not left the room of the ego. You still have to get up and go through each layer of deeper and more subtle delusions, and that journey is the journey to enlightenment. Enlightenment is not a brilliant moment, nor is it a glorious experience to recount. Enlightenment is a disappearance without a trace of the experiencer. There is no longer an ego witnessing. There is no one feeling the truth. There is no longer a center to cling to the so-called light. It is the absolute absence of every distinction, every label, every idea about self and the world other than awakening, which can suddenly come like a breeze. Enlightenment is the result of a persistent journey of deconstructing the ego, a continuous letting go. No more conditions. The enlightened person does not need to prove that they are enlightened, because there is no one to affirm it. They no longer live with a purpose, an ideal, a philosophy. They just live in absolute oneness with reality as it is, no more, no less. To understand more clearly the difference between awakening and enlightenment, we need to analyze not only through surface perception, but must go into each layer of the deep nature of these two states. These are the key differences, not to classify rigidly, but to help us reflect on ourselves more honestly about the nature of awakening. Is the realization of a new truth that we have never seen before. It is a stroke, awakening from the old way of life, a overthrow in perception. Whereas enlightenment is not simply realizing something, but the complete dissolution of all illusions. Especially the illusion of the ego. The enlightened person no longer retains any image of himself, including the image of the enlightened person. How awakening happens? Awakening can come suddenly through a major event, a spiritual experience, or a moment of deep awareness. Enlightenment is not so sudden. It is the result of a long process of letting go, contemplation, and refining the mind, to the point that everything that can be named falls away, including the person who is practicing. In terms of duration, awakening is usually just a short moment. It can disappear after a while if not continued to be nourished by deep observation. Enlightenment is the opposite. It is a stable state, no longer shaken by circumstances, no longer dependent on emotions or knowledge. Of the person experiencing awakening still retains a center, i.e., there is still the self that is seeing, knowing, realizing, whereas enlightenment, there is no one to see anymore. No more subject, no more object, no more person inside experiencing the outside world. Every boundary dissolves psychologically after awakening. Many people feel excited, happy, even want to share, want to teach others, but after enlightenment, there is nothing left to say. No more need to teach, no more desire to be recognized. Silence becomes the only language pure enough to survive. If we consider the role of the ego, then awakening is a step forward, but the ego can still come back, this time in a more sophisticated form. With the shell of awakening, tolerance, peaceful enlightenment, there is no more room for the ego to exist. It is not defeated by reason or will, but completely dissolves the ability to get stuck. Newly awakened people easily mistakenly think that they have reached the destination. This is what makes them stop halfway. No longer continue to observe or let go, while enlightenment, there is no more person to get stuck, no more story to tell, because the whole structure we are on the path has disintegrated. This distinction is not for people to locate themselves where they are. It is simply a mirror so that those who truly want to go deeper can be honest with themselves. not to rush to cling to special feelings, not to mistake the first flash as the dawn of liberation. That is why awakening is precious, but should not be deified. It is like a flash of light in the dark, enough for us to see where we are, but not enough to illuminate the whole journey. If we stop there, embracing the flash as if it were dawn, then we will never reach the eternal illumination of truth. On the contrary, those who are truly on the way to enlightenment often do not care about that name. They are busy leaving themselves little by little. They are not in a hurry to speak out, not eager to share, because they know that any expression of truth is a betrayal of truth. And only in that deep silence can the true presence without name or form be revealed. Understand the difference between awakening and enlightenment. Not to judge who has come where, but to remind ourselves not to stop when things start to seem right, because the true light never blinds. It is the quietest, the emptiest, and the most honest. The whole journey you just heard is not to make you doubt others, but to help you stop believing in the image you are carrying about yourself, because that image, no matter how subtle, is the last layer of cover between you and reality. If you have awakened, be grateful, but do not cling. If you have not awakened, be calm, because the truth has never been far from you. If you are walking, go with empty hands. Do not carry any goals, including enlightenment. And if you stop, then stop for real, not in the search, not in the hope of knowing anything more. Just stop gently. No one remains, because maybe right in that stopping, what is will reveal itself, without name, no form, no applause. And then you will understand why all that is written is just footprints in the sand. You did not really listen to a lecture. You just walked through an empty area where no one preaches and no one listens. Triatam is just the silence between two thoughts. I wish you to be awake in everyday life, and often in awakening.